Derek, welcome to studio.
Thank you.
We often hear the word disruptors, and some people argue they may be a curse to an enterprise, or some say they may be a blessing. What would your view be?
I think that they can be a blessing as long as one is cognizant of them. I think it's like anything else. If you ignore it and hope it'll go away, it almost certainly won't. But if you understand what the disruptors are, if you're informed about what they can be, they can create many opportunities to grow your business. If we look at the South African context today, I think most large enterprises here are looking for areas of growth, and often they're looking to other geographies. But they can't replicate the South African model that's grown up over many years in a very unique situation in South Africa and other countries. And one of the key ways they can do that is by using technology. And they can themselves be disruptors by having very different, lean, technology-enabled business models on the African continent, in the international sphere. So it can create tremendous opportunities for South African enterprises.
You touch on a very interesting aspect in terms of geographic differences. We've seen a lot of South African businesses and also international businesses move onto the broader African continent. What has that meant from a technological aspect?
I think there are a couple of challenges moving into the broader African continent. The first one is that the technology skills and sometimes the technology infrastructure is not often the same if you look at any two countries. In Africa, I think that's compounded by the fact that often the development level of many of the economies where you want to go and target a burgeoning middle class, a burgeoning consumer base, is quite undeveloped. And I think what that poses is the challenge that you have to think very differently about technology. You have to think about things like remote models. You have to think about things like cloud computing, which can enable you to ramp up your compute capability very quickly, bring new applications to market very quickly. You have to think about things like automation, where you're not that reliant on local skills. And all of those are enabled by technology, but they require a very different paradigm about how to do business.
If we look at South Africa in the broader global context, where would you say we are in terms of technology and adapting to the technology from a business and a social perspective?
South Africa is a very interesting economy as far as technology is concerned. I think we have some pockets that are at the absolute cutting edge. If you look at, for instance, financial services, if you look at payment technologies, not only South Africa, but the rest of Africa is at the cutting edge of things like mobile payments. But if you look at other areas, typically around the telecommunications infrastructure side of it, the availability of bandwidth, particularly in outlying areas, we're at the other extreme of the have-nots. And I think one of the great challenges here is how do you marry those two? How do you marry an end-user base that is used to the best in mobile technology, the best in end-user computing technology, with an infrastructure that is not always up there with the best in the world? That gap is what I think you have to close, and that's the real challenge in South Africa.
And which countries would you say we should be looking at emulating in order to close that gap?
Well, if you look on the African continent, I think there's no doubt that Kenya has been the leader over the last 3 or 4 years, not only in mobile payments, which is obvious, but I think in many other things. When you visit Kenya, you open a daily newspaper, you see a government information service that you can SMS to get information about what seeds to plant, depending on that location your SMS comes from. Very, very interesting, practical application of technology to serve some people that otherwise wouldn't have access to that information. If you look elsewhere on the continent, I think there are very interesting uses of technology in education in places like Zambia, in Nigeria, where we're seeing massive middle class emerging. It's been a tough year for Nigeria, I think, but hopefully that's temporary and it'll come back. So I think that Africa itself is the first place we should look for lessons about how to use technology more effectively in South Africa. Secondly, of course, we have to look to the global world. And I think that there you have to look at Silicon Valley, you have to look at China and what's happening there, you have to look at India, particularly from a skills development perspective. And I think you have to look at economies like Japan when it looks at things like robotics. We are owned by a Japanese company, so it's probably an obvious place for us to look.
Yeah. On that note, Derek, thank you so much for your time and wish you all the best.
Thank you.